Hello, welcome to Hints for Health, a series of podcasts covering areas and issues of concern and interest to global workers and those interested in having optimum health. Join us as we explore topics that affect most of us today and find ways to address potential challenges to your health. So let's join our hosts, Brian and Stephanie Kidman.
Hello, I'm Brian Kidman, a medical doctor, and with me I have my wife Stephanie Kidman, who is a registered nurse. She loves to work in the areas of education and prevention of disease. Today we're going to talk to you about parasites. Now, people who live and work overseas often forget the dangers associated with parasitic infections until they get one. We invite you to review the detailed information that we have about parasites in the document online on our website of Compassion Link. It's under Hints for Health. That way you can remind yourself how to protect against becoming infected. You could recognize the symptoms and then be aware of the treatments.
Let's give our listeners a brief overview of that information in our podcast today. And let's start by reviewing what a parasite is.
Now, the word parasite derives from the Greek word parasitos, which interestingly means one who eats at the table of another. Therefore, a parasite is an organism that lives in or on another organism, which we call the host, and takes nutrition from that host. A parasite is by definition dependent on a host for survival. Parasites can certainly cause disease in animals and humans.
Examples of parasites include worms, scabies, lice, and ticks.
Mosquitoes and ticks are both types of parasites, and they transmit other parasites that cause diseases such as malaria and Lyme disease.
Are they easy to get rid of?
Well, some parasitic diseases are easily treated, but some are not.
And in what part of the world are parasites most often seen?
The burden of these diseases often rests on communities in the tropics and subtropics, but parasitic infections also affect people in developed countries as well.
What are the most common ways to become infected?
Insect bites are a common way, as is just eating or drinking something that's contaminated. Parasite eggs can be transmitted through animal feces or by eating or handling raw meat or fish. Now, if someone who has worms handles your food without washing their hands well beforehand, they can certainly pass the worm eggs on to you through the food they give you. For example, in addition to getting hookworms from contaminated food, you can also get them by walking barefoot on contaminated soil where the hookworm gets actually through your skin into your body and into your circulation and then into your intestines. You can also have passing of a parasite through direct and indirect contact with an infected person.
Oh, tell us more about that.
Well, depending on the parasite, contamination can be from skin-to-skin contact, certainly sexual contact with fomites. A fomite is another word for a shared item like tableware, glasses, could be combs, brushes, clothes that you share, bed linens that you share, food and other things as well.
And how would you know if you had a parasite?
There can be a wide variety of symptoms, of course, depending on the parasite. But an example, intestinal worms. They are a common parasite which can cause weight loss, abdominal pain, anemia, constipation, itching, and sometimes can be largely responsible for a large belly with skinny arms and legs, like we've seen in some villages in places we've been.
Yes, I know someone can come to the clinic and say their child is always hungry, but they eat a lot, and yet they're still losing weight.
Well, that's because the parasite is taking some of that child's nutrition away from them.
And how about Lyme disease? It's becoming a more recognized disease in the U.S., especially with improved methods for testing over the last few years.
Now, ticks can carry the Lyme bacteria, which is called Borrelia, and Borrelia is the cause of Lyme disease. So the tick bites the person and injects the bacteria into the person. Then over time, that infected person can have a variety of symptoms, including joint pain and swelling, neurological symptoms like tingling and burning of the skin, fatigue, brain fog, dizziness, rash, other things as well.
Since many parasites are transmitted from person to person, one of the most effective ways to prevent infection is to thoroughly wash your hands with soap and water.
Absolutely. And then also avoid drinking questionable water. If you think the water is questionably clean, then use a water filter before you drink it. Or if you don't have a filter, then boil the water for a minute or two. And if you live in an elevation of 6,500 feet or higher, then you might need to boil it for 3 minutes.
Remember, cook it, boil it, peel it, or forget it. And can you tell us how parasites are diagnosed?
There are several ways, depending on the parasite that you're testing for. Stool testing, or we call it fecal testing, can identify helminths and protozoa. Helminths would be worms like tapeworm, and protozoa would include things like Giardia. Stool samples have to be collected before the person takes any anti-diarrheal drugs or antibiotics, or before any x-rays with barium would be taken. And then some parasites are hard to find, and therefore you have to submit several different stool samples over several days in order to find the parasite or its eggs. Blood testing is becoming more sophisticated, and it can detect a variety of parasites, especially using blood smears and what we call PCR tests. PCR tests are tests that look for pieces of the parasite's DNA. And then the old Scotch tape test, which some parents remember from their childhood, where a parent gets a piece of Scotch tape and folds it back on itself and then sneaks into the bedroom at night and touches the tape to the anus of the child that they're suspicious about eggs for, and then see if there's any eggs or worms on that tape. This is especially common, or was common, for pinworms. Now, your doctor may use x-rays with barium to diagnose more serious problems caused by certain parasites, but that test isn't usually required for diagnosis.
And how do you treat parasites?
Treatment for most parasitic diseases is available through healthcare providers once the diagnosis is made. So treatment is mostly drug-related, but diet, of course, plays a role as well.
And tell me more about what diets help resist worms or parasitic infections.
Let's see. So there are foods that have some anti-parasite properties, like garlic and onions, also pumpkin and papaya seeds, pomegranates, beets and carrots, oregano, then my favorite, coconut, and diets that are generally low in processed and sugary foods and high in fiber will be helpful to get rid of parasites.
And getting plenty of water in the diet helps us as well, since it is a key to keeping the bowels moving, eliminating intestinal parasites and eggs.
Parasite resistance to anti-parasite drugs is also becoming more common, and that's where a drug is unable to completely eliminate the entire population of parasites in a person. The few parasites that remain can become resistant to that drug, and then with time they reproduce and create a whole new population of worms that is also resistant to that particular drug.
I know in several places in the tropics that I worked, the schools would routinely hand out antiparasitic drugs to the children.
Oftentimes they were given the wrong drug for the wrong condition, and parasite resistance to drugs is worse and more common where the distribution of anti-parasite drugs is inappropriate and indiscriminate. That's why a diagnosis of the specific organism is important. Although in certain areas of the world, the healthcare professionals know which worms are the most common, and they may treat accordingly without testing. Anti-parasitic drugs should complement but not replace good sanitation practices.
I would think the school would be a great place to teach hygiene and sanitation.
They certainly would. And I know at Compassion Link here, where we work, we have something that we call the Community Health Evangelism, or CHE program, where we teach a teaching method to people who live in village areas so that they can go in to those villages and teach from house to house on a variety of health-related topics. And over time, change the mindset and the knowledge base of the whole village area.
We can also go into the schools ourselves and teach on hygiene and sanitation and many other health issues. We are all about health education and disease prevention. We are here to serve.
Thanks for listening to Hints for Health today. Join us again in the future for this series of podcasts that will help you in your goal of optimum health. This series is created and produced by Compassion Link, an Assemblies of God World Missions International ministry. I'm your host, Neil Ruda. For more information, visit www.compassionlink.org/hints for health and follow us on social media. God bless you.